The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
Now, our final guest today has written a memoir about growing up in a loving yet abusive rabbinical family, in which her father demands unswerving loyalty and a commitment to guarding terrible secrets. Welcome to the show, Sara Sherbill.
Thank you so much, Selina. I'm really happy to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, Sara. And I know this can't be easy, but you've put all this into your book, which is called There Was Night and There Was Morning. So we're talking about your father, and he was the head of a splinter Orthodox religious community.
That is true. That is true. I grew up in Chicago, and Chicago has a very large, established religious Jewish community in the city. But we were living kind of 30 to 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and my father had kind of taken on this task of establishing a new Orthodox community out in the suburbs. And it's worth noting, he was actually remarkably successful at doing so.
Yeah, to the outside world, from what I read, he was very charismatic.
This is true. He was a very handsome, very good looking, very warm, a very gracious person. He was a beautiful speaker. He interwove biblical poetry into his sermons. And I should mention that my mother is also a very beautiful, gracious woman. We had people over to our house all the time on the Sabbath, on the holidays, for Passover Seder. And my parents really created a full-fledged community basically from the ground up. And it was our role as the children, I'm the eldest of 5, and it was our role to kind of project this image of, this very happy, wholesome religious family.
But it wasn't. Can you tell us why and what happened?
Sure. So look, on one hand, it was authentic. There was some truth to it. On one hand, we were a very loving, happy family. But at the same time, we were all carrying around this dark secret, which was that my father, behind closed doors, was physically and emotionally abusive to my mom, to myself, to my sister, and to my younger brothers. And that was, as you can imagine, Selina, that was a very, very heavy weight to kind of carry around with us. And, what is a secret? I mean, a secret is really just something that you're told you're not allowed to say out loud. So, we were just kind of carrying this around on our backs while trying to project an image of, perfect happiness.
Especially when it's your parents or your father particularly telling you to keep a secret. When we're growing up, we do as our father tells us because we don't know any better.
It's so true. And I'll tell you something that's interesting. I never thought about this before, but when you said, your father told you to keep it secret, no one ever told us to keep it secret. That's the funny thing and the sad thing. It was like we intuitively knew, don't talk about this. Don't talk about it.
Yeah. And what about your mother? Did your mother ever say anything, or did she try to take you guys and leave, or was that not the done thing?
Right. So, I will give a lot of credit to my mother because although we couldn't kind of share publicly what was going on, obviously, in private, she would always say to me, this isn't your fault. And your father's very sick and it's not your fault. Now, that may not be the complete solution, but it at least planted a seed in me that, this was not my fault. So that was helpful. In terms of leaving, that's kind of the age-old question for abused women, and I think for those of us on the outside.
Oh, Sara, you've gone a little bit quiet. I don't know if you've moved away from the microphone, but you've gone a little bit quiet.
Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yes, you're back with us now.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's very easy for those of us on the outside to look and to say, well, why didn't you leave? I think that's a very common response in cases of abuse. But, it's not so simple to leave. There's financial considerations, there's communal considerations, and, There's also the trauma of being in an abusive relationship for many, many years, which, affects your decision-making capabilities.
Yeah, I totally get that. I've interviewed many people, not just women, in abused relationships, and I understand why it can be difficult, especially for your mum with 5 children, not just one child.
Exactly. And I think, there were times over the years when she tried to leave. There was a point when I was in high school where she did file for divorce, and the police got involved, and we went to a family member's house and stayed there for a while. And she did make, many efforts over the years to kind of extricate us from this situation. And sadly, tragically, she was just met with so much pressure from the outside, go back, he'll change. And my father would put on, kind of a song and dance, and we would go back.
Yeah, it happens. With your father, what was it? Did he have a bad temper? Did he lose his temper quickly? Is that what it was?
Well, that's the $1 million question. When I was growing up as a child, I was always trying to kind of crack the case and figure out what is wrong, what is the problem. Even as an adult now, looking back, I do think he was certainly suffering from mental illness. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't diagnose him. He was never diagnosed in his lifetime. But I think he himself had been a victim of abuse, right? As is so often the case. He himself had been a victim. He was dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma. And to answer your question, yes, he had a terrible temper. But, I think the question is, where does such a temper come from? I mean, at the end of the day, I really do think it's untreated trauma, even on the part of the abuser.
Was he born into the religion? I'm trying to work out whether he was trying to counteract the devil in his head with something good. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. And I think that's a very insightful question. So both of my parents grew up totally secular. I mean, they were, Jewish by birth and by heritage, but really had very little connection to what that meant. They weren't part of really any kind of religious community growing up. And they both kind of discovered it in adulthood and became very devout. And I think you're right. I think that's a very good point. I think my father sought out this kind of position of religious authority in a way to kind of, manage his own wounds. And for better or for worse, usually for worse, I think a lot of people who are in positions of religious authority, whether it's preachers or priests or ministers or rabbis, I think a lot of religious leaders go into it, in a way to kind of not just save others, but maybe also try to save themselves.
Mm-hmm. Was it just, not that, I don't mean the word just in that, was it just you and your siblings and your mother, but was he doing this to anyone else?
So that's a very deep question. So when I was growing up, I just naively assumed, we were the only ones, it was just a private family problem. And this was something that only my siblings and my mom and I were privy to. And it really wasn't until I was much older, until I was a grown adult and already married with a family of my own, that I discovered, and I write about this in my book. So, go out and read the book and you'll learn more about it. But as an adult, I discovered that, in fact, we were not his only victims, and that he had been abusing other girls and young women in the community. And this was a complete shock to me. And that was a very kind of pivotal moment in my life. And that was really the moment when I decided I needed to write this book.
And as well as writing the book, have you gone to the police? Do the authorities know? I mean, I don't even know. Has he passed away now?
Yeah, so my father passed away 2 years ago. And prior to that, we were estranged. We've been estranged for many years. My siblings have also been estranged from him. My mother divorced him some years ago. And so we haven't really been in contact. But one of his victims, who actually got in touch with me and reached out to me after I had published an essay about my father's abuse, she found me and she contacted me. And I know that she had involved the police, and the police had been involved. And it's a whole kind of long, sordid, sad, terrible story that I write about in great detail in the book, kind of this young woman's failed attempt to get justice.
Yeah, that's the sad thing, isn't it? The police and the authorities wonder why people don't come forward. And,
Exactly.
Sometimes you think, well, why should you hear so many of these terrible cases that go unnoticed?
Something I've learned is that in any religious community, to research this book, I read a lot about abuse in religious communities, not just the Jewish community, but, especially in the Catholic Church, where it's been such a serious and well-publicized issue. And what I learned through all of my research is the powers that be, whoever those powers are, whether it's the church, whether it's the temple, whether it's the synagogue, they have a very profound investment in making sure that stories of abuse do not get out. And what I've learned is that religious institutions will pretty much stop at nothing to keep people quiet.
Yeah. We're hearing more and more about it recently, sadly. As far as you're concerned, I mean, I can't imagine what you and your siblings and your mother went through. Is the book also about how you healed?
100%. I didn't want to write a book that was, only doom and gloom. I think that can be sad and disheartening to read. And the subtitle of my book, the title of the book, as you know, is There Was Night and There Was Morning. That's a quote from Genesis. But the subtitle of the book is a memoir of trauma and redemption. So I think it's pretty clear what the trauma is. We're talking about, physical, emotional abuse. But I was also very interested in what the redemptive part was. And for me, I could talk at length about the different aspects of my healing journey. But one thing in particular that has helped me is this notion of kind of moving from saying, this is a shameful story, I'm embarrassed about it, this is a terrible secret to share about my family. And, for many years, I kind of just tried to squash it. So I think kind of moving from saying, this isn't my story, to then saying, actually, this is my story. And not only am I going to talk about it, I'm going to write about it. I'm going to publish a book about it. And hopefully, through reading my story, others who have suffered in similar ways can see their story reflected in mine.
Yeah, I think it takes one person to make that stand, to give other people the braveness to come forward as well and join you.
100%. And, I want to say, I didn't come up with this idea out of thin air. I mean, for myself, over the years, I found so much comfort and I found so much reassurance and validation in memoirs that other women have written about surviving abuse. One book that comes to mind is Educated by Tara Westover. Another book is the classic, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. I mean, there have been a bunch of books that have come out over the years that really comforted me and inspired me. And I thought, maybe I can do something similar.
Yeah, well, I think you have. You are indeed a survivor and an inspiration. So I thank you for joining us today. The book for our listeners is indeed called There Was Night and There Was Morning, a memoir of trauma and redemption. It's by Sara Sherbill, who we're chatting to now. And I believe you can pre-order it now. Can you, Sarah?
Oh, you can order it. It's out. It came out in September. Go to Amazon and order away.
You see, I don't know if it's in America, it was earlier, but I've got you can pre-order it because it's out on the 21st of November. But I'm sure people can just check for themselves.
Absolutely. Oh, you know what? I may be speaking from the American
Yes, that's what I
perspective,
thought.
and you guys are in Europe. So you can order if you're in America. If you're in Europe, you can pre-order. But either way,
order it. Oh, have you gone? You're not gone, have you, Sarah?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
There? Yeah, either way, order it. That's the message. People need to order it. Do you want to give your website out as well?
Sure. I'm at www.sarasherbill.com, or please follow me on Instagram. I post on Instagram about my book, about my family, about the kind of background behind the book. And I'm on Instagram, just my name, Sara, Sara, Sherbill, Sherbill.
Well, it's been an honor to chat to you. Thank you for sharing your story, Sarah.
Selina, it's really a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure's mine. You have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.